Good morning, everybody. My name is Christian Winding Rasmussen. I'm from Denmark. Don't worry, this is not wine, it's water. I have with me today my colleague Martin Forsberg, who is from Sweden. And we would like to give you a brief tour of what is CEF eInvoicing and what is this all about. What you hear today is not a fairy tale, but is a personal experience. Martin and I we have been in this domain for more than 15 years now. We sit on the other side of the table together with service providers. We sit as public authorities. 2 years ago, we were approached by the Commission stating, could you please help us? Go out, share your experience, tell us the story of your countries and your own effort in towards rolling out full end-to-end e-procurement and specifically the e-invoicing part. Martin had a lot of experience being a consultant for the public sector, highly involved in the Pebble project, highly involved in the standardization in Sweden. Myself also involved in the Pebble project and the eSense project. And today you find that professionally, both Martin and I have split personalities. One part of us is working for the Commission, trying to be neutral, going out, spreading the positive word. Another part of us is of course, Martin is a consultant for his own company. I recently joined a Danish infrastructure provider called eBox. And it doesn't really change anything, but what we try to do is that we try to make the best of the best practices of these countries and roll it out so it affects as many people around Europe. So it means that we can really share our passion. It's our baby that we're going to present today. Today's webinar or today's talk will be recorded. It will also, all the slides will be available. On the first slide, there is a link to our country page for Ireland. You will also be able to engage us afterwards, engage us with the community on our web portals, and also you'll be able to download some pictures taken from today. And if you notice that Martin and I will be sitting with our laptops, it's not because we don't want to pay attention, but we're actually trying to capture all the questions. We would like to hear from you, because otherwise we cannot improve and we cannot go out afterwards and provide the proper assistance. We would like to learn, engage with you, have some interactions on what is your problems right now, how far are you, what's the level of maturity, and how can we assist in the future. It depends a lot in the different member states when we go out there, what level of maturity are we on. Martin and I, when we were first engaged by the Commission 2 years ago, we set up with a full slide deck of 1,200 slides. And don't worry, you'll not go through that today. I think we have a couple of hundred slides to kill you with, but we will try to, of course, we had a lot of interactions with Declan and Maura and the whole team here in Ireland on, okay, who's the target audience? How do we try to really meet your expectations and demands? And this is also why that in a short while I can tell you that we can provide you with more technical assistance afterwards. So in case you come home after this workshop today and you realize, okay, we really have to do something, or these guys are actually knowing what they're talking about, then we can also provide you with the gory details of how to do the XML, how to do the size, how to do the standard, how to do the implementation of the structural components. Okay, so many of the slides you'll hear today is also, it's learned by heart. So it's not a polished presentation as such. So raise your hand if something is missing or you want to learn more. The objectives, we will take you a little bit into the CEF eInvoicing, of course, and our services. I'll include some slides on the funding opportunities through CEF. Ireland has already been somewhat successful. There are 2 proposals. We'll come into that so far. And also Martin will take us into the e-invoicing from a user perspective and the European norm. We hope that we can meet. We had a broad scope for the target audience, and shortly we will ask you who you are. So we would like to have, let's say, a raise of hands. who regards themselves as public authorities. It can be regional, local, municipalities. Could you raise your hand? Public authorities? Yeah, Martin will do the count, measure. Do you have any service providers? Private sector? No? Okay. One, yeah. Welcome, good to see you. Banks, standardization, okay. National agencies, ministries, yeah, a couple more, okay. In any case, Declan has all your contact details, and afterwards we will provide you with a questionnaire. Again, it will not be a lot of questions, but there you can fill in the gaps that we might have, so that we can, for instance, do a second round together with the office here, and then try to fill up these gaps that you might find during this talk. So, CEF eInvoicing. CEF Connecting Europe Facility, as Paul was introducing, started up in 2014 with the directives of e-procurement, e-invoicing, and a number of others. In the small leaflets you have there, you also have some different papers. It's the same slides, so I don't want to dwell too much about it. Within Connecting Europe Facilities, the CEF, we have the digital service infrastructures. 970 million euros will be invested up until 2020 in various grants, and you will be able to apply for this funding. I'll come back to that in a little bit later. We have a range of building blocks. These are the core components of CEF and the Commission that has been inherited by large-scale pilots, best practices from different member states, service organizations, service providers who agreed to provide their assistance either through funded projects or freely throughout the last 10 years. So you can see the different building blocks. Some of them are there. It's not all of them. Underneath each building block, there's a full cascade of different technologies. We have more than 300 types of software available, open source, and you can go into our website to look upon it. If you look at the different sectors on the left-hand side, you will be able to see that it ranges quite a lot. Everything from naval, maritime, tobacco industry, digitization, e-health, e-justice, are reusing the components. And I think this is one of the core lessons learned from the talk today and our past is reuse of these best practices. For the funding, we offer these kind of fundings. You can apply for 75% of your cost and up to 8% of your administration. And you'll be able to find a lot more details on this on the CEF Digital Pages. CEF Digital Pages is a free community where you can engage with the experts, people like yourself from different member states, people that are implementing, people that are about to implement, stakeholders, and decision makers and the Commission people. We also have a dedicated place on the website for e-invoicing. There's also a dedicated place for e-procurement. E-invoicing is a little bit special on the DSI level because in the normal e-procurement terms, e-invoicing is of course part of the procurement cycle, but e-invoicing has its own web space there where you can find a lot of different tools. The readiness checker, there where you can assess the maturity. There's a knowledge base, there are some different interactions. You can take some different tests. You can also do conformance testing. Yeah. And of course you can interact with the community. We, Martin and I have already been to a number of countries and provided assistance also for different key stakeholder organizations such as CEN, ESPA, European Multi-Stakeholder Forum, Open Pebble. If some of you have a need, there are some different mechanisms you can engage us with. You can go in and join our webinars. We already have 9 of them. They've been recorded, and all of them have a specific topic. But they are now available online. We will continue these series of webinars, so each time with a new topic, new learnings. We also have some options of remote trainings. This means that in case this audience decide that, okay, you want some additional info on some of the specific topics, we can do a remote session together with you if you're arranging it. And also we can do more technical workshops, and there you have to apply on this mail address. Usually what will happen is that our colleagues here in Ireland will probably organize it, but we are also in talks with different service providers and other ministries. So if you see there is a need for a specific area, it could be health, for instance, wanting to do e-invoicing, that could also be a topic for our trainings. Within e-invoicing, we have a lot of service offerings, and we're trying to cover as much as possible from start of implementation, where we are right now here today, to the actual implementation, the testing, raising awareness, how can we do it, how can we do the funding, etc. We already had these webinars. Some of them are very, very technical, XML, cross-industry invoicing, the new standards, the infrastructure on e-delivery, how does it work together with e-invoicing. We expect for the next 12 to 18 months, when the directive is coming into place by April 2019, to be able to offer a new round of technical and governance-focused workshops. And this means that also Ireland is in a very good position, since you already decided to join Open PEPL. And this means that part of the governance issues is already covered by that. But of course there could be some issues within the different ministries, within the public authorities, that could be of concern, and here we can cover that. But also the hands-on work with the standard, with CEF, Martin will come back to that, is a topic. We are now continuing the webinars in a new format. It's pretty much an open session, open mic forum, where you can drop in, ask your questions, and talk to us. And the next one will be on the 4th of May. It is concerning the CEF, and that is in some countries it's a no-no word, and in other countries it's the thing. It's part of the new standard. Martin will go through it. But we realize that a lot of the different countries are looking into their own way of doing the new standard for e-invoicing, and this is also a problem for the general interoperability of Europe within e-invoicing. So we're trying to not persuade people, but we're trying to give them the pros and cons, what is the benefits, and what's the lessons learned from the early adopters. Because it can be quite costly to stand there with your own maintenance, with your own standards, with your own development of the new standard for e-invoicing. CEF Digital, how many of you have a profile there? No? Shame on you. You know, CEF Digital, it's free. You just go in, sign up with your email, and you get a lot of content there. You get a lot of information, you get all these presentations. You can reuse it, download it, resell it. Probably not, but something like that. The last questions, we'll wait with that until the end of the day. Yeah. I included a couple of slides on the funding and grants. And basically, I wanted to do this because there is a new call opening here on the 2nd of May. Here you can see the different calls this year within CEF. Specifically, there's a call on e-delivery, which is the core infrastructural component of also Open PEPL and e-invoicing. And then there's an e-invoicing call, 5 million euros. The deadline for both of these are in September. We don't know yet until the 2nd of May if the deadline will be in the beginning or the end of September. But there you have an amount you can apply for. And then later this year there's also an e-procurement call open. So within e-procurement and within e-invoicing there is also included e-delivery. So in case you have a project, or several of you have projects where you need to roll out these and you haven't been involved in past Irish proposals, then now's the chance to apply for some of this money. You can apply minimum 2 private or public partners from 1 or more member states. Good practice is that you'll have to have some national support. I guess that won't be a problem. And you can get up to 75% of your eligible cost covered plus 8% in administration. So if you have any kind of project that are looking into developing service infrastructure where you want to do e-invoicing, want to do some general procurement, now is the time. The expectation is that within Connecting Europe Facilities budget frame, this will be the last call for e-invoicing. We don't know yet the new budget, and the directive is in April next year. So we will have to see if more calls are coming. So this is the last chance to get some budget there. The past projects and proposals has an indicative duration of 12 months. It can go up to 18 months, depending on size of the project scope. We had a few projects proposals that was up to, I think, 89 partners. We, Martin is part of the committee that are assessing all the proposals that are coming in. And of course, we also know the result from the last one, but unfortunately, we are still not allowed to tell you the result of that. 2 weeks. We should have waited a little bit more with this workshop, but 2 weeks from now, I think we will be a lot smarter. But we know what happened, and for the proposals, there are some different objectives. Basically, it's about rolling out the new European norm, and as well as the e-delivery components. So I just included this for your information. We don't, until 2nd of May, we don't know the specific or exact call text. It's already being prepared. It's already there on the CEF digital pages. But this was the call text from the last, or the scroll for the last call. So I provided this. It has been changing a little bit what we've seen. We have been involved in all the past calls. We can see that in the beginning there was a high uptake of public partners in the different consortia. We can see the different countries who applied there. And as time progressed, more countries realized this, but also the private sector was waking up. And in the last call that was evaluated here in January, I believe it was, we could see that this trend is still growing. We cannot illustrate the exact numbers, but again, the countries that are involved is illustrated here. Up until the last call, these are the amount of project that was and the budget that was applied for or provided, awarded, it's called, within CEF eInvoicing. And I included this list of all the projects that are ongoing right now. So basically, if you have the left-hand side, you have all the different specific project names. And if you have interest in what is going on in different projects, you can just look it up, Google them, and funny how Google now is a term, but you can just Google the names, and then you can find the different details on the projects and who to engage with, etc. And just going one back, Ireland already had 2, and hopefully somebody will look into one more. I don't know. It's important that when you're applying, read the documentation carefully. It has never been a problem for the Irish proposals because, I mean, you're native English speakers and everything, so you always have an advantage when you're applying for funding to us. But read it carefully. We have a lot of lack of information in other proposals, not in Ireland, but outside in the other countries, and fill out the forms, guide for applicants, and there's also a lot of help if you connect to our colleagues at INEA. So this is one way of doing it. So I will quickly change the presentation here. And do you have any questions to the funding and CEF in services? No? Otherwise, just catch me in one of the breaks, and we'll try to see how to do it. Okay. Although Martin and I had 1,200 slides, we realized with this audience that we actually had to make some new ones. So some of these slides are the first time we presented them, and for this section I would like it to be like a history, a fairy tale, perhaps, but it will try to illustrate for you what has been happening since 2003 when the first movements towards mandatory e-invoicing was made in some of the countries. So it's lessons learned and it's best practices. It's not a silver bullet. So you have to find your own way and you have to cover your own grounds and do the necessary steps. Don't try to attack the whole elephant in one piece. Try to chop it up and in a very traditional, agile way. So the Nordic approach is a common saying within Open Pebble because there was a movement. The movement was very good for the countries as such, but we also learned that it's very, very costly to be the first movers. It's very costly to have all the maintenance, carrying all the cutting edge technologies, and being alone with the standard means there's only one party that can buy and further maintain this in the future. And it doesn't really cater for the single digital market. It doesn't really cater for the cross-border aspects, movement, employment, and much more. And this was also why we had to do something. The first steps was that in 2003, in Denmark, they set up a business case on electronic invoicing. Here they investigated, okay, what are the actual benefits if we are introducing mandatory e-invoicing? The assumption at that time was that we would save roughly 100 million euros per year. This is still the case. Actually, it has grown a little bit. The division of the potential was with this. I'll not go into the details, but I was going through the slides again this morning, and I realized that a couple of weeks ago I was visiting Mark here, and we had a demographic slide showcasing what's the difference between Denmark and Ireland, and actually not a lot. They're very comparable in the size of public sector, size of citizens, how you're built up, the parliament, everything. So I would reckon that if you did something similar or already did it, you could find some similar numbers here. But this was the case in 2003 for Denmark. I really should have included that slide. I can see that now. The savings were estimated to be divided evenly in the public sector. I often get the questions, is it actual savings? Is money in the hand? Yes and no. Some of them are, of course, administrative costs. Some of them have been of course, positions within the public authorities that are not there anymore. But the expectation was that depending on the expected invoicing volume, they should divide this. And of course, then each ministry and municipality were drawn with the amount of expected savings from their appropriation for 2005 and onwards. This meant that in 2003, Denmark was the first country in Europe to pass a public payment act because they realized that regulation was needed. The public sector and the companies all had to be very committed in order to ensure this critical mass. And 4 initiatives was undertaken. I'll write them from below because e-invoicing was introduced. We introduced something called Easy Account or NemKonto in Danish for all citizens and all companies, creating where you can pick out one bank account for which the public sector can always do transactions to and from. And of course, closing of cash tills and eliminations of float days. The Nordic approach. The funny thing about the Nordic countries is that I guess it's the same thing with the EU and the United Kingdom and everything, but we feel like brothers, but we're not. Every time we can mock each other or point fingers and point out that we're better than the other one, it's quite good. Of course, now it's me telling the story, and I'm from Denmark, so that's a little bit one-sided. But that doesn't change that I'm also trying to tell the story from a Nordic perspective. And that means that in 2005, Sweden did the first pre-study and business case on e-invoicing. And in there, they made a few assumptions over the facts and figures of the public authorities, as well as the maturity, what could be the prime candidate for an early adopter of e-invoicing, and what is the focus. Main point here was that very few service providers was actually doing e-invoicing in 2005. So there was a great potential, a great momentum to gain by introducing something like this. This meant that in 2008 there was it wasn't a legislation because it's not until recently, Martin might compliment me here, but there was an anticipation that all Swedish government agencies should send and receive electronic invoices no later than 1st of July 2008. The potential savings in Sweden, which is of course also a larger country than Denmark, was roughly 400 million euros over 5 years. So that's all good. I started working for the Danish public sector in 2007. I had 1 year at Lego, the bricks, being in charge of their website. And then I was headhunted to do an agile project management office. And quickly I was caught into the loop of Pebble, the Pebble project, which is the predecessor of the Open Pebble. Pebble was established in 2008, and it was built in a way where we could see the different islands of procurement around Europe had to be connected. We needed to have the interoperability in place. For those of you who already engaged with Open Pebble or heard some of the talks about Pebble, you have seen some of these drawings. I mean, they're so old, I think 10 years or something like that, but they still work there. In the Pebble project, we were at the end 11 countries and 7 countries connected to it that successfully managed to integrate our service providers on national infrastructures on e-procurement, e-invoicing together. And for some countries, the focus was, for instance, on e-orders. Some countries it was e-catalogs. For some countries, e-invoicing. In general, we used the same transportation mechanisms. And this led to be the standard that we're now using in the Commission for e-invoicing. It's led to be the standard for e-delivery with some steps on the way. In Denmark, Nemhandel was, or Easy Trade as it's called, was established in 2009. It was a year after the Pebble project, so we already did a lot of work. I was the project manager for that work. It was built as an open source platform, free to use, free to download, free to further distribute or sell, or whatever you felt like. We invested a lot of effort and money and time from the public sector to develop open source standards, open source components, and making room for a market-driven adoption. In the beginning, it was really, really difficult because many of the service providers was telling us, "Oh, this is our business. We don't want anything to do with this." It was when I first introduced them to the Visa card. It was like, "Oh no, we have checks." But here, they really saw that okay, we need to do this because we're also doing it from a European perspective. So Nemhandel contained guidelines and components that makes it more easy for IT vendors to implement it. But the mantra of the easier and cheaper it is, the more IT solutions is being offered. Of course, these are the same core principles as we have today within CEF building blocks: reuse, open standards, open source components, international formats, international collaboration, international stakeholder cooperation with CEN, ETSI, ISO, depending on the different sectors. Yeah. In 2011, Denmark then was the first country to make it fully mandatory to use NemHandle. And this means that, as Martin will tell us after the break, that NemHandle today is used by 98% of all public authorities in Denmark, but will be upgraded to new standards. There was a range of steps made here, and I mainly put this slide in so you have some background once you get home. So what was this guy actually talking about? Because he's talking really, really fast and I can't really keep up with him. But there are some steps here. It's Denmark, Norway, and Sweden did some initial learnings, and it took us 10 years. And a lot of the different countries, including Ireland, have done their part in the past, but is now having what can seem as a huge workload in front of them. But in fact, don't try to reinvent the wheel here. Try to reuse what we have been doing, because our lead time has been more than 10 years. This also means that once you hit the barrier where you have the full mandatory e-invoicing in place, with legislation, with the infrastructure, then the SMEs benefit, then the public bodies also benefit. The SMEs are happy now because they get paid faster, sometimes even within days, depending on the business logic that are around the acceptance of e-invoicing. And of course, now we can also see in the last couple of years that also the business-to-business, business-to-consumer is rising rapidly. What did it cost? When we established or started to establish, it was around 10 million euros. It's around 1 million euro every year to run and administrate. I think it's still the same thing, not only in 2011 or 12. But of course, cost is going down. At some point, you hit a barrier where you will have a solid maintenance. So when you're investing in new infrastructure, you'll always have something for storage, something for the transaction, the actual possession of the invoices, etc. And that is almost always a fixed cost. As you heard, we started the Pebble project, and the Pebble project was led by Norway. Now, from Denmark and Sweden, we think we understand the Norwegians. We think we speak the same language, but in fact we are not much alike. We don't like each other very much. Of course, in this room we do, but Norway was very keen on running the Pebble project, and it was not necessarily regarded as a good thing for Europe, because Norway was not a fully fledged European member state. Norway is similar to many of the other countries. So they have, I think, 598 municipalities. That's unbelievable. Some of them have five citizens in it. That's the overhead for the administrative side is. In Denmark we have 98. How much is it in Sweden?
250.
Yeah. Still small countries. How many do you have here in Ireland?
Municipality, well, we've 31 local authorities, but in terms of public bodies, we've probably over 8,000.
Yeah. So Norway had their own lessons, but they were pretty much piggyback riding on the Pebble project. And that being said, meant that they developed, on the basis of the Pebble project, they developed their own standard, EHF, Elektronisk Handelsformat, which is just a subset of UBL, same subset as we did with NemHandle and you did in Sweden. And if you see the deadlines here in comparison to what happened with the Pebble project, it is exactly to the point. The Pebble project ended on the 31st of August, and this was the same period as Norway. On the 1st of September, Open Pebble was established. It was established with 3 founding fathers: Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. Martin was one of the representatives from Sweden, and I was the head of beneficiary for Denmark at that time at Ministry of Finance. We saw that Pebble should not just end there, and the Commission saw the same thing. In Norway, they, even though starting later than the rest of us, 5 to 6 years later, they quickly gained a lot of momentum. Today we have 130,000 receivers in the network of Open Pebble, which means that once you're connected, you can send your documents or receive from these 130,000 across Europe. For Norway, it was a very short lead time, and this could be the same thing in Ireland if you're doing the right steps. You can quickly gain the transactions and the numbers, and it doesn't really matter if you're talking about e-invoicing or orders or catalogs. It's the same kind of business case. And Norway also learned that both from Denmark and Sweden, they had to encourage the service providers to be there. They had to, in fact, encourage competition, which meant that in Norway they decided to put it up in the public space that, okay, this service provider sent this amount of invoices, and then the service provider started to compete to get their customers onboarded, their public authorities onboarded, and this meant that there was a lot of traction between the service providers, also in collaboration, to get this up and going. 2012, of course, and 2013 was some important years, and the Commission also said that, okay, well, you have some good practice in the Pebble project. In fact, they had 4 other large-scale pilots where they would like them to converge into one pool of building blocks, one pool of core competences, and that was the eSense project. I don't want to dwell too much about it, but the eSense project was mainly designed for trying to finalize the development on the components and trying to really see how could the Commission take over the components and the documentation afterwards. The goals of eSense was, of course, to improve the cross-border access for citizens and businesses to public services, and there was the basis of these large-scale pilots. eSense was perhaps, to some, it was a success, but whereas the Pebble project introduced e-procurement, the semantic layer, the specifications, eSense was much more about the infrastructure. So eSense was the roads, and the Pebble project was the cars that are driving on the roads, or trains and train tracks, whatever you like. This is just a high-level overview of the different projects, just for information. 2014, I already mentioned it, so I'm not going to talk too much about it. The directives, EU invoicing and e-procurement, was presented and approved, and CEF was created. This is us. We are a lot of people at CEF, and we try to go out in many aspects, and we have had a close collaboration together with CEN around the e-invoicing standard, and this meant that in October 2017, the new European norm for e-invoicing was introduced, and it was published in October, 23rd of October, at an event in Brussels. I believe we were there. And of course, after years of very hard work, since 2014, and a lot of consensus building, a lot, and by many, many experts across Europe. This meant that here in 2018, we can still see that there is a big potential for invoicing. And a lot of the potential is still not reached there. These are now some quite old figures. I also had one there from Ireland. I think it's 4 or 5 years old, these figures. But it's extremely hard to realize this. There are billions of invoices floating across in different infrastructures each year, but only three of these is electronic invoices. And whereas Europe is leading on business to government, US is having a different focus, Latin, South America is another focus. And in general terms, from a global perspective, we can only now just start to scratch the surface. So within OpenPebble, we now have some tractions, not only within Europe, we have South Africa, we have Australia, we have Singapore coming up, Canada is looking into this. Many different countries, Russia, Ukraine is also looking into it. Why is this? Well, there are some different barriers, and I think I'll just skip through them. But having individual standards, it doesn't really matter if it's subsets of the new standard with the size. It doesn't really matter if it's your own national standard for invoicing. Having different kinds of business models. So each service provider has its own business model. How much do I pay for sending invoices, etc.? It doesn't really cater for the general interoperability across Europe or within the different member states. Legislation-wise, what we can see is that, okay, for Denmark it took more than 10 years, but it wasn't until we actually make the law mandatory e-invoicing. Come on, guys. 7 years later, 8 years later, actually. It wasn't until then that we really hit the target. So get it in place, get the legislation in place. And e-invoicing alone doesn't cut it. Once the market get fully electronic e-invoicing, they demand more. They would like to have orders, catalogs, payments. We want the banks. Where are the banks today? We need them here. So a lot of movement going on. Some service providers is covering the entire portfolio, so they can cover many different types of documents. Doesn't necessarily need to be e-procurement alone, but they can also cover payments and signing and such things. And of course, world economy. For some of the countries, they're still struggling. We were in Greece, and they're still trying just to keep afloat. Same thing about Cyprus, we were also there, a little bit more positive, but yeah. And then there's some specific needs. Paul was mentioning the ESPD, European Single Procurement Document. I was involved in the design of that and development for the Commission. And each country had its own requirements. So some countries needed just one criteria to measure whether or not their companies was okay to do a tender or something. Let's say Italy. How many do you reckon? 640 criteria per company had to be measured. So this is the level of expectations around Europe when we're doing these things. Yeah, we already been there, the islands of procurement. So what will happen now is that Martin will take the floor. This was the historical part. A little bit later, Martin will take us into what is then happening within the early adopters. What is Denmark, Norway, Sweden, some of the other member states that we've been visiting, what are they doing in regards to the new standard, the infrastructural components, and also feel free to come and ask us the questions in the break or during this. When you get home, you of course get the slides. I included a couple of slides here on the Pebble project. You will also be talking about that later, Declan. Something about the access point providers, something about eSense, the background, and something about the infrastructural components. That's it for me.